Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was born ready. Mr. Speaker, just to perhaps, rekindle our minds about yesterday's conversation, we were talking about this particular motion that was moved by the committee that I sit in on how we can be able to deal with our debt in the country, Mr. Speaker. And I did allude to some conversations yesterday to do with physical consolidation, and I think that I want to dedicate my conversations around, as a country, how can we be able to start thinking about serious physical consolidation? The idea that what are these major drivers that are making us not to be able to come out of this debt menace in the country, Mr. Speaker? And just perhaps to redeem some of the areas that I did focus on yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the current physical deficit that we are looking at in these years, BPS that have been put forward, Mr. Speaker, is 703.9 billion. That is the money that the government is looking at in terms of trying to close that physical deficit that the government has. And Mr. Speaker, it has been proposed in this MTDS that 55% of that is going to be borrowed externally, and 45% is supposed to be borrowed domestically, Mr. Speaker. I've always held the view that domestic borrowing in whichever form, Mr. Speaker, as long as it goes to the ages of 25% and above, Mr. Speaker, it then brings the idea of crowding out, Mr. Speaker, where the government will be borrowing more at an advantage of businesses that are locally in the country than the businesses will be able to borrow in a commercial setting where commercial banks will find it more lucrative for them to be able to make quicker money and more stable, give more stable loans to the government than they would ordinarily to businesses, Mr. Speaker. I can attest to this, Mr. Speaker, in the sense that even the lower part of the pyramid, Mr. Speaker, that this current government has wanted to focus on in the narrative of hustlers, the hustler nation, Mr. Speaker. If you remember last year, the central bank did give a report on the MSMEs landscape. This will be the micro businesses that we have in this country, small, medium enterprises that we have in this country, Mr. Speaker. And the challenge that we had in the entire last year, and I think it's a challenge that we're still going to face in this year, is that small and medium enterprises, for every money they borrow, about 10 shillings that they borrow, 6 shillings they end up defaulting. And why are they defaulting? Is because the capacity that they have in terms of being able to run a business is not there, and therefore banks will be dissuaded even more when they realize that these small and medium enterprises cannot be able to borrow more predictably, and therefore they just become unbankable. So, Mr. Speaker, this is something that as a country we must start thinking about. How do we ensure that before even we get to the domestic borrowing and external borrowing conversations, we can be able to shrink the physical deficit in this country, Mr. Speaker? And some of these areas, Mr. Speaker, that I talked about very passionately about was which are the areas that are enticing capital for government to spend in, Mr. Speaker. I have held the view very strongly that if we are borrowing money, Mr. Speaker, and that money does not go to development. For instance, right now, we are ranging between 65 and 68% of our national budget going on recurrent budgets, whereby we are just financing a budget that is not a development budget, Mr. Speaker. If we continue borrowing as a country to be able to eat, to be able to buy Panadol for workforce, to be able to just consume, Mr. Speaker, we end up being in trouble. Another thing I wanted to say, Mr. Speaker, as I submit on this, is that I have been sitting in the committee of CPIC, that is County Public Investment and Special Funds Committee, Mr. Speaker. And in that committee, we have been able to observe a serious problem with regards to pending bills and with regards to